think we're live.
I can never tell, but yes, welcome for our next Building Blocks book review with Vicki Carroll and Nancy Williams. I'm Mary Pat Kavanaugh, and I am here supporting this book review conversation. There's so much greatness in this book. It's called Building Blocks, a practical guide to supporting kids and teens with learning disorders and academic and behavioral challenges. If this is you as a parent, one of your children, or somebody you know has a child that can benefit from this conversation, please tune in. We have talked about so many great things. We've talked about bullying. We've talked about how the brain works. We have talked about all of these different great conversations that encompass behaviors, behaviors as symptoms of some of these other issues, the cognitive processes within the brain and how different brains function differently. And we're diving deep into that today. We will be sharing more about how you can get this book. If you want to grab this book and you haven't had a chance yet, you will. I'm dropping the into the comments here in just a few minutes. You'll be able to go to thoruptutoring.com/building-blocks, and it will take you to a page where you can link over to your Amazon account, purchase the book, have it shipped to you in just a couple of days, and then come back to our Building Blocks page and qualify for bonuses that are absolutely free and qualify to be entered into our drawings that we're doing. So make sure you do that. And in the meantime, let's do a quick review of who are you amazing ladies and what brings you here today. Nancy, I'm going to ask you to go first today. You're the executive director of Thorup Tutoring. Tell us a little more. How long have you been doing this for, and why did you decide to support this book?
I've been tutoring children for about 35 years. Worked for some doctors for the first 7 years when I was just in my 20s. And then brought my business home when my youngest child was born, and then it turned into I have had a big waiting list, and now we have a great tutoring company in Holiday, Utah, and we service about 200 kids a week and have great staff. And I support this book because we work with so many kids with ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, and we help them succeed in school. And quite often we need to, we work, not quite often, all the time we work with teachers and parents as a team. And this book kind of puts everything together, some action steps and some accommodation lists so that when parents go into schools, they know what accommodations that their kids can have. It helps teachers know what accommodations they can give to students that are struggling. It gives parents information about ADHD, about anxiety, about growth mindset, about personality, so that they can understand their child more. So I just suggest that every parent needs this book on their bookshelf, and it's even good for grandparents to help with their grandchildren, so they can see who their grandkids are, what might be going on, and who can help them.
Nice, thank you, and welcome, Vicki. Share a little bit about who you are and why you decided to write this book.
Well, I've raised two boys that had learning challenges, of which we'll talk about today. They both have ADHD and executive dysfunctions, along with dyslexia, and one has dysgraphia as well. So I just remember as a parent feeling so overwhelmed with the diagnosis and wish that I'd had a book like this that I could have referenced. I've just kind of learned through the process and had a good neuropsychologist and good support from the school that helped me along. But I wish that I'd had a better understanding, because I think I could have empowered my children differently, asked different questions. But I'm at the other end of it now, where they're both grown and graduated from college and working in the tech industry. So I have the advantage of, yes, these kids can succeed. There'll be, challenges along the way. And it really is like a building block situation where you build one upon another until you find the right combination of accommodations or modifications that work for them, and then helping them to feel empowered, helping them to see this not as an end all, but an opportunity to just change behaviors a little bit, thinking a little bit, and tap into what works for them. So I've been with Nancy about 9 years. I did do some work about 8 or 9 years in the school systems in the East. And then when my husband retired and we moved here, I was fortunate enough to connect with Nancy and work as an academic therapist for her. And so it's just great to be able to work with parents and the schools and the child and build their learning and educational continuum step by step. That's what we do along the way to help find a combination that works for them. And it's been great because so many of my students I started with at Thorpe, I'm now seeing as juniors and seniors. And I was just thinking the other day, oh, I have 3 or 4 that will be graduating this year. And it's just been amazing to watch their growth and to see them succeed and now writing college entrance essays to move on with their lives. And that really is a silver lining for me.
Nice. So parents, if you're watching us today and you're feeling like, yeah, I need to help my child and I don't know what to do. But also if you feel like, I don't know how to help my child and also I need help myself. What I found out as a parent is that this book has helped to give me answers that I can take and have a greater understanding about my child, because I also am a mother with 4 daughters and we have struggled. Some of my kids have many things that we have talked about in this book and over the course of the last month as we've been doing these book reviews. If you have missed out on these book reviews, I strongly recommend going back and watching them. They're really fabulous. We've talked about a lot of really great information. But without further ado, let's get into this book today. And we're going to talk about, we're going to start with chapter 3. And I think that's important to note because this is not a book. We have not gone through these book reviews in a linear fashion. We have taken them chapter by chapter. We started with the behaviors, which are kind of at the end of the book. Then we got into the cognitive processes and issues, which are where we're at now. And next week or Friday, we will also be doing kind of our final recap, and we'll also be giving you some great tips on your 504s, IEPs, and all of those things that you need to do to go to your school and help advocate for your child. And that's a lot of what you guys do at Thorpe Tutoring as well. But today, ADHD. Let's start there. It's ADHD, not ADD. I trip over it. I feel like it's another politically correct term that I'm struggling with. Tell us about it. What is it? What's the correct way to say this?
Jump in, Nance.
Okay, it is ADHD and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADD was the term that used to be used, but a lot of kids have ADHD inattentive type. And those are the kind of children that kind of fly under the radar in class because they're not hyperactive. They're not a behavior problem. They just lose focus. Or they're focused on the fly on the wall or the way the teacher's dress looks or what's out the window. They have a hard time focusing in on one thing at a time. So the children that have ADHD with the hyperactivity quite often do well with the stimulant. Well, even inattentive type, they might do well with the medication, but the hyperactivity, the age comes from the hyperactivity. So you'll know if your child is bouncing off the walls or it's like he's run by a motor, or is hard to discipline versus if they're just quiet and not paying attention. Those are the ones that slip to the cracks. So we want to make sure we identify, and you need to get a good pediatrician or a neuropsychologist to identify this. The schools can even identify it. So if you're worried about your child, and your teachers will usually give you a signal, even from as early as preschool, that your child has trouble focusing, that they're They may be disrupting the class. So listen to your teachers, because you really can see it in a structured situation when the kids start school. And you want to take it seriously and know that there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to describe it incorrectly, but just know that ADHD, I believe there's like 1 out of 10 children that have ADHD, and it's not a bad thing. And there's a lot of doctors and lawyers that have it, and they do just fine. It's just learning how to manage it and learning about your child and how to best help your child to succeed in school.
That's great. And there's actually 3 subtypes or subsets, and Nancy mentioned 2. And some kids have what we call combined, where they have a combined of the hyperactivity and then the inactive or the inattentive as well. So it's important to get that diagnosed properly. Just because a child is a little wired one day doesn't mean they necessarily have it, or if they're a little out of focus one day. So it is something that a professional needs to diagnose. It's something we see a lot at the center, and oftentimes is combined with another type of learning challenge or behavioral challenge. And it's interesting to note, because ADHD is real. It's a real disease. A lot of times people think it's something they'll outgrow. People don't necessarily outgrow it. They learn to manage it. I have 2 boys that are late 20s and 30s and still medicated for it, which has helped them be able to have greater success. So it is real. It's one of the most researched areas in child and adolescent mental health too, which tells us that it's pretty dominant. The precise and exact known reason for this isn't really available. Most of the time, the belief is that ADHD is genetic. It is a brain-based biological disorder, and there's lots of research out there that really shows that it has to do with dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain, and there's lower levels of that. So that's where the medication comes in, and I don't want to get bore you too much with the nuts and bolts on that, but it's really important to know that it's not something that behavior is a part of it, but behavior modification can't change it, because it is a biological, it's in the brain. And so we need to be aware of that. And most kids, the most notable is that they're either really withdrawn or they have problems with paying attention and completing tasks, impulsivity. They'll speak out when probably they shouldn't be. Even in younger grades, they'll get up out of their seat. My youngest son had the hyperactivity. He would just get up out of his seat and wander around the classroom. And, that's a problem. So it really varies from child to child, but anything that's disruptive in their social environment, interacting socially or within the education system might be the initial red flag that goes up, that parents need to take a closer look at this. And I really appreciated Nancy saying that the teachers are key here, because they have them 6 or 7 hours a day. And many of them with the hyperactivity, the diagnosis comes earlier than those with inattentive. Sometimes the inattentive diagnosis won't come until they even get into higher level grades, like 5th, 6th, 7th, because they've been able to manage up to that point. And then being inattentive causes their grades to drop, because the curriculum just gets more difficult and they're changing classes. So that's something to watch for as well.
2 of my daughters have ADHD, and it shows up so differently in each one of them. One of them literally can't sit still. She has ants in her pants all the time. Because my girls are girls, they were able to kind of manage it better, I think, but they flew under the radar. And my other daughter, who's very introverted and very quiet, but very smart, also completely flew under the radar for this, because she was so smart that she could compensate. And secondly, she wasn't bouncing out of her seats, causing disruptions. But it came to a head in, I think it was 7th grade, when she was taking a test. Her whole class was taking a test, and she was done. She finished early because she is very smart, and then forgot she was taking a test, was looking out the window, heard a bird and turned around to look behind her, and got in trouble for cheating, because she was looking, and she didn't realize, because her brain wasn't connecting that where she was looking, it was thinking on different things. And it was a serious offense that ended up being, the teacher said this, my daughter said this, and it was rough.
Well, and I think I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of kids with ADHD do miss social cues. And so she probably just missed those social cues, that when you're looking at your paper, the paper next to you, that could be interpreted as cheating, even though she wasn't looking at that paper to absorb information to then put onto her test. But that is, part of ADHD for many kids, is missing those social cues and not being aware of that, which can be problematic. So, but the great thing is about ADHD, like Nancy mentioned, is there are therapies for it. There's medication and different things that can be put in place. And I think once the diagnosis is made, it's one that most educators are really familiar with. It's a term they've heard about. And so there's certain things where some of the accommodations in the classroom about where they sit, if they're closer to the board, they can be more attentive. And so there's a lot of things that can be done just within the dynamics of the classroom that can help a child, because a child with inattentive, to put them in the back of the room is not a wise choice, because they sometimes need the teacher to give them nonverbal cues, like a touch on the shoulder or something, just to bring them back to focus. That's not really observed by the whole class. It's very subtle, but it's hard for a teacher to do that when the child is in the back of the classroom. So those are the kind of accommodations that can really make a huge difference with their academic success.
Well, I want to bring up that ADHD is not related to IQ. So many of our ADHD students, their IQ is so high, they're so bright, and they just don't understand. They're lacking the ability to plan, to pay attention, to stay organized, to really structured settings help these kids. And we have to be compassionate and understanding. And teachers over the last 30, 35 years have really, we've all learned so much about it. I remember when I first started working for a couple of neuropsychologists back in 1985, ADD it was just named ADD. It hadn't been called minimal brain dysfunction, if I remember correctly, in the early 80s. So it's a fairly newly understood, and teachers didn't understand it then, but all teachers are they understand it, they've seen it, they're there to help you. The school teams are there to help you, they want to help. Medication's a very tricky situation, because a lot of parents don't want to do that, and that's completely understandable. So you have to work through ADHD as a family. Some people kind of may grieve it at first, because it's an issue that doesn't go away. I think some stats that I heard many years ago from my friend Dr. Goldstein was that 1/3 of people do become adults and don't look back and don't have any issues with it. 1/3 blend into society and probably more like Vicky's kids, and they're medicated and they continue to have a successful life, but they do still have ADHD symptoms. And the other 1/3 can really struggle if they're not supported. So we as parents just have to teach our children that ADHD is not a problem. ADHD can also open up a world of creativity, and they can be successful and learn that they have to be organized, and learn that they have to have a planner, and that they may have to work a little bit harder. Organization comes naturally to me, and organization does not always come naturally to children with ADHD. So it's teaching them these skills as well, and having them be self-aware of who they are and what they need to do to succeed in life.
Well, I think what you said is so great. And I also don't want parents to think that it's their fault.
No.
It's not that they had poor parenting skills, or they allowed their child to, watch too much TV. And there's no magical pseudo formula out there that's going to work for every child and make it all better. That's the hard thing about brain chemistry, is it varies from child to child. And like Nancy said, some do very well on medication, some don't. Sometimes we have to come up with other ideas and different ways to approach it. But most often, I would say, at least the students I work with that have ADHD, I've watched them as they mature and my own two sons that have matured, they learn, there's apps on their phone to keep them organized. There's lots of different tools as they become more mature that they're able to access, so that they don't constantly feel like they're behind the power curve. Because kids with ADHD, if there is any executive dysfunction, like the organization and the planning and the initiation, they start to lose self-esteem when they're always the one being pointed out in class or getting their papers lost and turned in late. That affects self-esteem. So that's where the cognitive meets the behavioral. And we need to be aware of that as well, because we don't want them to lose or feel lack of confidence and esteem and not be able to reach their potential because of something that we can put accommodations into place that can help them, especially in the school environment and then the home environment as well.
So while I'm listening to you ladies talk about this and, evaluate my parenting as with these two daughters who both are now arguably adults, and we pushed through. So one of my daughters, I didn't realize, I thought, without going too far down it, I'll talk about my daughter who almost didn't graduate from high school because she couldn't think, she couldn't get her head around and we realized it was a self-esteem. She ended up taking a gap year, and from a parenting perspective, her gap year in my mind was all about building her self-esteem. Let's fill her with a whole bunch of things that she can succeed at, because these last couple of years were awful. And I was a parent and from a family that didn't realize that there were resources for ADHD. I thought it was just something that you had to live with and push through. And I don't know if other parents, I feel like today I would recognize and get the support for my child that I never got, because we really struggled. To come to today, she's graduating as a 4.0 student from the university and is doing very well in that one area of her life. She still struggles to pick up her clothes. She doesn't even notice that she's dropping them sometimes. She's really, but she can make her brain function on a high level in one area at a time. And she's developing those executive functioning skills. So I still have hope for that. But I'd like you to maybe speak to the parents that might feel like I did, where my family members just said, you just have to live with it. You just have to deal with it. You'll get past it. And not realize that you can benefit from, books that can help you, and even more resources and support at school.
Absolutely. And there are parent groups where parents can go to that they don't feel like they're crazy. You have to check your local county and city where the parent groups are. And there are accommodations that can be made for your child. There are plenty of books, including this wonderful book of Vicky's, that have action plans and things to look for and executive functions to look for. So I want to just read a great quote that Vicky put in her book. ADHD is not a discipline problem. ADHD is not a spoiled child. ADHD is not a temper tantrum. ADHD is not a choice. It's not the easy way out. ADHD is a medical condition. It's a chemical imbalance. It is a big deal. It's a battle for self-confidence. It's a fight to maintain focus. It's a war between the brain and the body. ADHD is real. So I think that's the first step in parents realizing that this is real. This is not your fault. This is not your child's fault. And there are so many experts out there that can help you. So let's dig into that, Vicki, and see how we can help these kids and parents manage.
I love that quote too. I think if I'd had that to look at, because my initial feeling and of course my son that was diagnosed, this has been well over 20, gosh, he's 33, and he was in second grade. So do the math. It's been, 25 years ago that he was diagnosed, and I was totally clueless. Although since he was diagnosed, I've been able to look back and I've seen other family members, my dad included, that definitely had, characteristics of ADHD. And a lot of times it does kind of run in families. It's a little bit more hereditary, not not always, but it can be. And so I think Nancy mentioned this before, that compassion is huge. But as a parent, know you will be frustrated. There were many times raising both my boys where I was frustrated because I knew they did homework, but it didn't get turned in, and then they missed grades, and and it was just like, how can I help this child more? And how can I almost wanted to take the burden on myself. And yet it was interesting to see as they matured and as they found themselves and found their footing and what they were good in. One is in sales and does amazing. He's got a personality for that. And the other one is a data scientist. Math has always been his thing. And so they find their way, but the journey can be challenging. Remember, it's treatable. It can be treatable through medication, but also just setting boundaries and parameters and learning what works best for your child. Structure is extremely important for kids that have attention deficit. So structure in the home is critical. Setting structure helps them stay organized. Rules and consistency. And that's kind of where you can go into what we talked about before with either the intrinsic or extrinsic motivators. A lot of kids with attention deficit need those extrinsic motivators, which, if you get this done in 15 minutes, then you earn this benefit, or this, you can watch 15 more minutes of television or whatever. So oftentimes we have to set those rewards within the home to keep them motivated until they become mature enough to set those intrinsic motivators where they self-motivate. Praise them, make sure that it's not constantly what they're not doing right, but oh my gosh, look how this worked. I really appreciate how you got right home, got your homework done. And I think, again, we have to look at environmental planning, setting up an environment that works for them so it is distraction free. A child with attention deficit probably won't do well during homework with earbuds in or the television going. So distractions need to be eliminated. That can be beneficial. Staying connected with the school staff, making sure that the IEP or 504 is being met, those accommodations and modifications. But I think really the most important thing is helping your child find things they're good in. So that even though they may be struggling here, they're having lots of success here, so that there's a balance there, so they don't feel like everything in their life is a disappointment. And I found with our two boys, it was sports. They really did well in sports. And through doing sports, they learned discipline, and they learned to focus in an area that worked for them and got accolades. And it wasn't just feeling like they were always behind the power curve because they had success in one facet or area of their life. And I have students that, are excellent in gymnastics or dancing or play an instrument well. And they are steamed through that, which helps to counteract some of the frustration and setbacks with the attention deficit. But I think for me as a parent, the most important thing, and Nancy, you can probably answer to this too, working with kids, is that organization piece. And
just going to address that. The organization piece is the toughest part. And keep in mind, some parents have ADHD themselves, so they have trouble organizing and keeping track of things.
Organizing themselves and organizing their child.
Right. So that's where you might need an outside mentor or a coach. And what seems to help parents, they're so grateful for, is, so on my website, I have lists of how to organize your child. They have to be organized in their backpack, first of all. And then you have to have an organized space in your home. One thing that'll really help parents, so people just live by the junk drawer, but every year I send parents lists of what you should have, and maybe just a special homework basket, all the supplies you need. So your ADHD child isn't, because once they get up looking for a highlighter, you might never get them to sit back down. So having all the correct supplies in one place, and there's a specific, it's even a portable kind of like basket that they can carry around from room to room, because sometimes an ADHD child, if you just want them to sit at the kitchen table and do their homework, they may get bored with that. So moving around the house, taking breaks, but having that internal organization structure of where does a paper go in the backpack to get turned in? And then somebody has to follow through and make sure that paper got turned in the next day. This is not easy for parents. And you can learn what to do. You can learn, putting the backpack by the front door. So in the morning, it's already packed, it's ready to go. having the clothes laid out so it's not a frantic time in the mornings. There are things that you can learn as parents to make life easier in your home and getting your kids out the door and back home with the proper supplies. That's another problem, is kids coming home with the proper supplies. I have ideas about that too, but that's
No, share them. I think you've got years of experience with that. I think you should share those.
so. One thing that I find that helps parents instantly is to not use the locker, except for maybe to put books in. Kids have trouble getting things home, so making sure. When I was a parent, and I was a busy working mom too, but I had a nanny, I will say it, and I'd have the nanny walk into school with the kids, make sure that they got everything written off the board, everything was in their planner, they had everything pulled out of their desk, they had everything, so at least we could get everything home that they needed. I call it the shove it in, zip it up, and organize it when you get home. And then when kids get home, the first thing they need to do, and even with parents working, you can FaceTime and say, okay, pull out your stuff, let's make a list of what needs to be done. And they may not need to do it right when they get home, but having a list of what needs to be done before they go to soccer, before they go to baseball, is a good thing, so you can plan your time. And when my kids were little, we had a college basketball game we'd go to, but we would take flashcards with us to study at timeout. So I'm not saying it was not easy. It was, my life revolved around work and school and making sure my kids got their homework done.
Well, and like you, I was working as well, and I had one that was inattentive and one that was the hyper. So different, I had that huge contrast, and what worked for one, we had to reevaluate for the other. And you just kind of find a pace. But like you, I found if they would write down what they needed before we even started a homework assignment, so then they could check off what they got done, that was empowering to them. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is finished. And they could see that. And then that got put aside, and pretty soon the checklist was done, and that's where that process praise comes in. My gosh, not just you did a good job, but why did you do a good job, and what did work, and let's try this again tomorrow. So you're building upon the positive rather than being immersed in the negative. And so I think that's critical as well.
One thing I want to bring up is it's a daily challenge. I have people come in and they've organized their kids. So they've given their kids, okay, here's 6 folders, they're labeled, but it has to be checked and gone through every day. I hate to tell people that, but it has to be, okay, let's do it. I call it a dump and go through. Let's go through your papers every day, put them in the right pockets, put out what we need to do. And I even have kids put a binder clip on the papers they're done with, so there's not paper shuffling and anxiety. But it's a daily, unfortunately, it can be a daily ritual that a family has to go through.
This
great about that is it turns into something they do in adulthood. So you're really giving them skills, not for just now, but for when they're on the job, and they're expected to be organized. If you're losing papers or information or not getting things into the computer in your job, that could cost you a job. So we're not only giving them skills now, but long-term skills. Sorry, Mary Pat, I interrupted. Your turn.
No, this is an important topic, and we all have so much. I want to just share from being a mom who, it's been, I think, 5 years or more, I don't remember, that both of you taught my daughter, who's 17 now, the backpack dump, which is this process that you have these folders, turn in homework, look at, and all of this. And it was such a struggle over and over again. And I felt like we would do 2 steps forward and go backwards. And it was just over and over again. 2 things I want to say about that. One is that now that she's 17 in her last year, she's one of those students that will be completing school this year. Vicki, one of yours, and she's starting to get it. She has very specific structure that she's created for herself. For the first month of school, she would come home at lunch because her backpack was so full, and we're close enough to the school that she was able to just come back, dump her books here, pick up her second batch of books, go back to school, and manage those, that same system that is a little bit tweaked for her, but 5 years into this, she's figured out a way that it works. The other thing is that I want to acknowledge that this pandemic that we're in, like the state of our children and parenting and everything else, is difficult right now. But if I was to look for a silver lining in it, I would say that for her school, she's required, they don't do any paper assignments. They can do the paper assignments, but then they have to scan it and turn it in online into their online portal. And this has been life-saving for her. She has that kinesthetic and visual need met, where she is taking something to the next level, ticking the box, and there's a visual where she can see, I turned it in and it's done. One of her biggest issues that she suffered from for years is that she'll do it part way. So she'll turn it into the teachers, or she either won't turn it in at all, or she'll turn it in the wrong place, or she will scan it in but not tick the box off, so it wasn't confirmed, like something happened with it and it stopped. And so now she's like blaming the system and it's broken, or it's the teacher's fault because I really know I turned it in. But she's now figuring out that she can, if she can see that little list that says it's marked complete, and feel that satisfaction. And that, Vicki, what you were saying, that took me a lot of effort to help her see the benefit and the self-esteem that happens when you can complete that assignment. I don't know why that took 5 years, but it did. And I would say, have patience. You were going to say.
And recognizing, you mentioned a couple of key points that come back to learning styles. Some kids are visual learners, some are auditory, and some are tactile or more hands-on. And so, and a combination of all, maybe. You mentioned, I think, the visual and the tactile. But when we figure that out, then we can play to that strength and help them with the visual as the checking off or the clicking in or whatever. If they're more auditory, then we play to that, or the more tactile or hands-on. So if you understand their strength too, you can set them up for success by having their check-in system, or the communication that you use, or the teacher's awareness, like just that simple tap on a shoulder, or trying to make eye contact or whatever to bring them back to focus without calling their name out and drawing attention to them in a way that lowers their self-esteem. And so it's those really subtle things that we can do. And very often, I'm so glad you mentioned this, Mary Pat, so often kids with attention deficit, ADHD, do fall into that external locus of control, where they blame. The computer wasn't working, the button wasn't right, my teacher didn't give me all that I needed, she didn't explain it correctly. It's just a defense mechanism. And once we shift them to that internal locus of control, where no, I made a choice here and it perhaps wasn't the right choice, but I can change it once I recognize why the behavior or the action didn't work. Then they own it, and then they can say, but as long as they deflect and blame, they don't own it, so they can't change it. So I appreciated you mentioning that. That's awesome.
And the hard thing for parents is you may need someone to help you. A lot of times, kids won't let their parents help them. And there's a real struggle between parents and children in getting things done. So that's why you may need a coach, or even, a really strong high school student in your neighborhood that your child will listen to. You can give them the tools. You can give them, okay, I need you to help them organize their backpack. I need you to help them with this today, because we as parents may not be able to do everything for our children. And a lot of ADHD, we're getting into this, have executive functioning difficulties. So executive functions may need to be taught to some kids, and there's executive function coaches out there. I train all my tutors in executive functioning, we've talked about this, how to actively listen, how to manage your time, how to make plans, how to improve your working memory, how to organize all of those are executive functions that need to be taught, and your child may not listen to you. So you may need some outside help too. And there's nothing wrong with you if your child won't listen to you either.
Very common, because they just know the emotional buttons to push, right? And as a coach or a therapist or as a tutor, we have the advantage that we see them 2 or couple hours a week, and they listen, you know. And then we have those check back systems, because really, I think a key piece for this too that we haven't talked a lot about, but is that flexibility and adaptability. A lot of kids with executive dysfunction struggle with flexibility and adaptability. And so it's just providing them the support that they feel the confidence to change or try to make change, because we know change is hard. We all struggle with making change. We've been thrown into change since the pandemic, and it's been a crazy ride for all of us. But as a parent, also being adaptable and flexible, and just knowing when you have to say, this isn't working and I do need help, or I do need support in helping my child learn to manage aspects of executive dysfunction. So I think in the book, I know I listed some action steps for that.
So in the book, and I do want to point out that one of the things that makes this book different, and if you've been watching these, you'll see me, I'm always referring back to it. This book isn't just all the information you need to know. It's also a series of checklists, really solid things and strategies that you can use to empower yourself, empower your child, things that you can do to help get to the other side of all of this. And there's so much goodness in this book, and I didn't mean to interrupt Vicki, but I don't want to gloss over the executive functioning, is it skills? Is that the right way to say it? Executive functions.
Mm-hmm.
This piece, and I remember a couple years ago when, Vicki, I think you wrote an article on it or something. And then I remember doing some research on it and working with Nancy on it. And there was a major aha moment for me when I read that these are skills that are developed through your teens into your 20s. So in my mind, I had just expected, like, my job as a parent was to teach my child organizational skills, how to manage your time, how to do all of these different things, not realizing that these are skills that your brain is learning how to do, and that there is a timeline maybe, and every person, every child is different and learns them in different sequences. And so, and likely most of them are not going to be learned by the time you graduate from high school. They'll be learned into your late teens and adulthood after that. I'd love for you to speak a little more about what are these executive functions, and it was life-changing for me reading that. And so maybe share a little bit of that with our viewers, which we do have some viewers who are commenting, and I'm gonna hop over there and look.
Oh, good. One thing I want to bring us back to too is personality, the 5-factor model. We know high conscientiousness are people that by nature are very organized. So even though you have a child that's not necessarily organized, doesn't always mean they have ADHD. They need to have more than just one aspect of this for a diagnosis to take place. And so I don't want parents to, be alarmed if all of a sudden they think, oh my gosh, my child might have this because they've lost a few papers. It might just come back to the 5-factor model. And that is in the book as well. That's under the behavior section. We've talked about that. So I don't want to get into that too much today. But I think that if just the 4 kind of steps, and Nancy, jump in if you think of anything else about helping them build flexible thinking, more than one way to approach and accomplish something. And that comes back to maybe that learning style and the thinking styles that we thought we spoke of in the last section. intermediate deadlines are critical for kids. I mean, they'll procrastinate and put off, and then all of a sudden, a project that they've been given 3 weeks to accomplish, they're trying to do it the night before. So that's where being aware of deadlines and blocking off time to accomplish something. Don't leave it the night before. That's just overwhelming. And a lot of times ADHD kids, their tendency will be to wait, to procrastinate. Customize their schedule. And Nancy and I do this when we go into the 504 IEP meetings. You know, maybe it's best for them to have the subjects in the morning, if they can, that require more critical thinking and organization for them, rather than the afternoon when they're tired and exhausted. And it's finding that their high peak performance time. And for some kids, homework after school, they might need a little break before they get into it. Some might do better to jump right into it when they get home. So it's important to find that high peak when they do best. I was a morning studier. I'd always get up early in the morning to study. I did much better studying in the morning. And this is, of course, when I was in junior high and high school and college, probably more high school and college. I retained and was able to retrieve much better studying in the morning, where maybe other people do much better at night. So helping your child identify that. And then we'll probably have a minute to talk about metacognition, which is also a critical piece of executive function. Nancy, did you have anything to add for the steps on executive functioning and how to help that other than what we've talked about?
No, just I think task initiation is an executive function that kids have a hard time getting started, and helping them get started, and knowing that once we do something, we get started, we set a timer, we've got something done, we can check it off, move on. What are some of the questions we've got, so we can ask some specific questions about executive functions?
I'm not getting specific questions, just cheering you on. Barbara Camp was here and she's giving you,
good.
you guys are great. You've got some fans following you around. But these action steps that Vicki was referring to, and if you've got the book and you're following along, page 74 and 75. And then before that, I think what you were touching on, Nancy, is this, some people need extra support around introducing new concepts. And there's a whole series of, checklist here as well for some of the accommodations of the executive dysfunction. Vicki, were you going to add anything to that?
Well, just coming back, that they'll probably hear metacognition as, especially if they do any reading on executive functioning or dysfunctions. And I think most people are familiar with task initiation and organization and planning. But if they see the word metacognition, that's kind of a big word. It's like, whoa, what does that mean? It's really pretty simple. It's part of it, but it's just taking the knowledge and strategies available to help them learn, but also problem solve. And some kids do disconnect when it comes to problem solving. They know there's a problem. Obviously, their grades reflect to them there's a problem, or that their teacher's constantly having to remind them they know there's a problem, but they can't isolate and identify what the problem is necessarily, and then how to make corrections, or alter behavior. And so metacognition is a big piece of the planning, monitoring, and evaluating. And some kids do that very naturally. I do that naturally. Probably both of you do as well, where you plan it, you monitor yourself, then you evaluate. If it's not working, you reevaluate and come up with a different option. Many times kids with attention deficit, ADHD, they struggle with that. So as parents, we need to help them to plan, monitor, evaluate, and realize that reevaluating is not a failure. That's a strength. That's amazing to be able to say, hey, I tried it this way, it didn't work, and there's other options available to me that I can try, and maybe this will work better, and then finding what does. And a lot of that comes with maturity as well, and seeing really what the big picture is, and there's more than one way. I always say to my kids, it's like driving, if you take the wrong turn, the GPS, gets you back on track. So there's more than one way to get from A to B, even in driving a car. A lot of my kids in high school relate to that. So you just recalculate and you just come up with a different way to get to that end piece. And it takes that monitoring skills, monitoring their behaviors, and really it comes back to those thought patterns, because it all is about perception that drives thought, that drive emotion, that drive action. So we want to make sure that growth mindset's in place for them to say, hey, I can make this work. This is not a failure. I'll just recalculate.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up, a lot of kids with ADHD, they find themselves failing and they don't know why. So, helping them, this book will help parents help their kids to know what's going on. And as a parent, our first instinct is to, if there's missing assignments or disorganization or F on a test, is to freak out. Well, because I've done it. But to not freak out and say, okay, let's see what's going on here. What's not working, which is what Vicki was talking about. And you may need an outside person to help you see what's not working, because we get emotionally involved as parents and kids and we don't know how to fix it. So you may need somebody, and there's people all over there. There's good tutors, good academic coaches, good teachers that can help you come up with a plan to change the trajectory of where this is going. And helping a child understand where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are, what can we do to make this better? How can I help you?
Well, and that's one of the reasons, Nancy, and I love the title Building Blocks for the book, is it is really about building one block at a time, and kind of sums it up, I think.
So I want to, before we completely wrap up, and I know we're probably getting tight on time here, but I want to acknowledge some of the other learning disabilities that can be common with kids. A lot of times, for some reason, they get packaged. There's ADD and there's, dyslexia together. And so let's talk about maybe some of those and what might be important. There's a lot here, and the book is really fabulous about all of this. And again, I don't know if I've said it enough, but the things that make this book different than anything else that's out there on the market are these checklists, these tangible takeaways that can help you do something right now, not just giving you information, not just helping you feel like you're not the only one, but giving you tangible things that you can do as a parent, that you can share with your child to have an immediate impact, and that you can take into your next meeting with your teacher or your school to help create these accommodations, or maybe just to have these conversations that need to be said. I'll tell you, as a parent, I never realized, I didn't know how to have these conversations. I think it was a combination of being told in one ear, you just have to live with it. And the other side of that was that I didn't know what to do or what to say or how to approach that. Or also the idea that, well, my kid's not completely flunking out of school, until she was, mind you, which by then it was almost too late. And so really that time should be spent with a kid who's struggling more than my child. When I look back, and I just feel like an awful parent because of all of that. But
do not feel like an awful parent. Please don't. I'm glad you said that, Nancy. We hear that all the time, and we do the best we can. I mean, I know what it feels like to feel like the failing parent, but this is uncharted waters for us too. And I think that we aren't only trying to empower our child, but we're trying to keep ourselves empowered so we can empower our child. And I love Nancy saying that, knowledge is power, and the book does provide the knowledge so the parent can feel empowered then to come up with a workable plan for their child through the school as well as in the home environment.
And I think we can get into more, and I don't know that we have enough time to get into dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, but a lot of neuropsychologists now are not calling them that anymore, but those are the terms that parents are more comfortable with it, that they know. Dyslexia is disorder of reading. They have a reading disability. Dysgraphia writing disability, hard time expressing their thoughts orally or on paper, and dyscalculia is struggles with math and some math disabilities. And so, you know, we're going to be talking about IEPs and 504s. I believe our next meeting is not till our last meeting might be the 20th, Tuesday.
Monday or Tuesday.
I think it's Tuesday the 20th.
It's next Tuesday, right?
And we'll be wrapping up accommodations that can be going on 504 plans and IEPs due to your child's ADHD or learning difficulties or emotional difficulties that can help your child that have been diagnosed with these things, and that can help them in the school and help you at home. So it's really, my advice to parents is we're going to get through this. It is not going to be easy, but there are things that you can do and people that can help you to get through this one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time. There's not even medications are not a magic fix for ADHD. I mean, we have to teach our children, and maybe have someone help us teach our children these organizational skills, the ability to adapt, working memory, which we've discussed. There's so many things that we need to do, and this book is full of the ideas to help you as a parent get started one thing at a time.
Vicki, is there anything else you want to add to this conversation before we completely wrap up?
No, I do agree with Nancy. I think in our session next week, when we talk about the IEP 504, it will be a really easy segue into some of the other learning challenges, impairment in the reading, writing, and math, as well as, you know, accommodations for test anxiety, whatever it might be. And so we'll definitely include those in our next conversation.
Nice. So I'm going to share my screen really fast for those of you who want to purchase the book and take advantage. Nothing on my computer is actually populating right now. So you'll want to go to thorptutoring.com/building-blocks. And why you want to go here instead of just straight to Amazon is because this is the page that you want to come back to after you've ordered the book so that you can take advantage of our bonuses. We have discounts. I think it might be showing up here. I don't know if I can move my screen here. Scroll down to the buy the book, click on any of the red buttons, and you can take advantage of the bonuses. And you can take advantage of all of the bonuses if that's what you would like to do. You'll use this little form and pop your order number in there. And then here are the bonuses. You've got discounts on Thorpe Tutoring, $100 off a neuropsych eval from Dr. Serpis, and an Amazon gift card for every single customer patient that purchases the book at Summit Community Counseling. You just bring in your receipt, and actually the instructions are on the thank you page after you've purchased. You also will get access to the drawing prizes, and we have a variety of prizes from gift cards to consultations with Vicki and support with your academic challenge, your child's academic challenges, and even this really beautiful artwork from Vicki's sister. So come back to this page and make sure that you complete this little form, and then you'll get access to everything. And in the meantime, I was going to bring up the confirmation, but I can't even stop sharing. Oh, there we go. It did stop sharing. Yeah, our next one, I will also share the link for our next event in the comments below as well, so that it's easy for you to get to. We will be available next week, right? Next Tuesday, I believe. And
yeah, next Tuesday, what, the 20th at 11? Is that what we show, Nance? Is that what you show?
That sounds right. I don't have my planner in front of me.
you know what? I had everything up on my screen and then everything just stopped working. So that's
technology. We have to be flexible and adaptable.
Absolutely. So thank you, ladies, so much. These are so fun. We have one more of these, and maybe we'll have to do like a revisit next year after this, because I've enjoyed connecting with you all and getting all this personal support and just feeling better. I think everybody should benefit from feeling better about being a parent when we've got kids that struggle, because we need that. So thank you.
You'll make it through, everybody. You will.
Thumbs up.